Hi, Brady. It's Jeff here. I've got 45. The train was canceled, so I've got to wait for the next train here. So I'm going to be here at the train station and do a couple videos, right? Because there's nobody here. Because it's like 9:15 in the morning. Um, so I want to do a continue on this working with the. I'm going to. This one's going to be working on the Germans, and it's going to specifically about uh, the whole thing with new work, what I've been seeing, kind of the seeing a lot of this focus on new work by different kind of teams and stuff in different companies. I mean, you can see this Patagonia was doing it, and there was companies in the Netherlands doing it. But the what I've seen is actually the Germans doing it, um, and at least I'll say, kind of depends on their version. It kind of depends on the people. But given the fact that we've talked about all these different factors of, the German traits and stuff, okay? And now I wanted to place it in the context of what happens, with the history of, look at the history of, look how many movies right now there have been about, we're in 2022 right now. We're in, beginning of April. And how many movies do we have about Germany, World War II, and the wars and stuff? I mean, it's just ongoing. I mean, the Marvel comics, half of the, if you look at how many Marvel comics and DC comics that come on, there a lot of them are about the wars, right? It's Captain America, Wonder Woman, all this kind of stuff, right? So it's just like it just never it just it there's a lot of stuff, right? So what I would say is, I mean, there is a history of the generations that the World War II has continued to kind of promote and continue to push throughout the generations until today. We're what, we're 80 years later. And the the and now I'm looking at like the whole new work thing, and how Germans are looking at this. And it kind of depends, but but I've seen the cases where um, the it feels as if, okay, that when Germans take this new work, I'm not saying all of them, okay, I'm not saying all, but I'm saying there's a risk to this, and I've seen it. It seems to be. Um, it's if there's an attempt in the new learning and the new work to undo the history, undo the past, right? To, or if you think about like the covering over the sins of the fathers. Um, it's hard to say that, but that's what it is. Actually, in the theological field, you call this expiation, right? Sacrifices. You're trying to cover over expiations, covering over, right, the sins. And it's as if this is an attempt to this new work thing is to undo history, to forgive history, to forget history, whereas history exists, right? Um, and to push into a new directional thing, an organizational approach, and make everybody follow it, right? So make everybody follow this new work thing, right? But what you want to keep in mind is that some other now, if it's all the Germans and just the Germans, then the Germans only working in Germany. Yeah, I can understand they can do that. But sometimes these organizational management things cover people from other countries. And I look at this thing, and I grew and lived in Europe for 30 years. So I've lived, in France, and France doesn't have this problem, right? So I got a train here being announced, so we'll have to deal with that right here. I'll talk a little bit louder while the thing's talking to the train, right? Um, but I think actually haven't been up in America, and have grown up there where I mean, working in small companies and stuff, and you just kind of make things happen, and it is new work. It's just whatever this you want to call this thing is, just working in startups, you just make things happen, right? Um, and I look at it, and having talked with others too, that come from uh, non-Germanic, more interesting Anglo-Saxon cultures, kind of see how their perspective on this is. and even those that actually lived in Germany. It's some of our culture, some of the cultures Anglo-Saxon, we just don't have this problem. I I I, I'm going to call it a hang up. Okay, I'm going to call it a hang up. It's a historical hang up. The thing of the wars, and I'm not saying it's a bad thing. Okay, I'm not saying that we're not saying that history did not have consequences. It does. I've mentioned this. That's why I'm doing this series of this book, right? Because I'm talking about how how uh, even the cultures where I live in and stuff and all that are impacted by this, right? So the the thing here you want to deal with is how is this being, how is this leadership kind of hang up, and how do we have to lead, and how do you deal with it? Sorry, I got the people announcing things are just because these are automatic recordings here. um, how other countries don't have this, right? Especially if I was people come in the U.S. I came to the Europe, and we just didn't even know about Germany. I didn't know the history of Germany. I didn't know that. Well, I knew a little bit of the history of Germany because you studied, history in World War I and World War II. I mean, it's part of the history classes. But actually know the in-depth stuff. Just didn't have to deal with it until I got to Europe, and it's like, and seeing how the Germans now dealing with that generations later and trying to kind of forgive and forget the past, um, by going to a new structure, which actually can sometimes actually create other structures and create other. You can unlearn hierarchies. The whole focus on unlearning hierarchies, but in unlearning hierarchies, what happens? The Germans create more hierarchies. They create them again, um, different ones, and again. The whole thing of doing the work and all these things is actually not have the hierarchies, right? Or the committee. I mean, it doesn't having all these things is just recreating them. Is it's just following the kind of the DNA of this needing to have structure, need of high hierarchy. It's just that, right? And so what I would say is that the um, whenever people are going to look at these new transformational structures into organizational management, to unlearning hierarchy, to kind of focus in that kind of concept, whatever you want to call this thing, right? There's always a tendency in that kind of way to have less structured management. Let's call that. I mean, I think it's really important to do an analysis. You don't have to sit there like for days. It's just take a few minutes to actually look at who's doing it, how many people. This is sales analysis, sales strategy analysis, right? This is what we do in sales. You kind of just you kind of analyze things, right? And I would analyze this situation and say, if it's all Germans, you need to have like some specific like coaching, and I would say some psychological coaching, historical coaching, right? I think that's really important in dealing with this kind of thing. When Germans are going to want to kind of move away from the history and kind of get away from the history and cover the history. I don't want to say cover over, but you know what I mean. It's to try to deal with the past because it's their hang up, their cultural hang up. And I'm not saying in a negative sense here. I'm saying it's a real thing, right? But they need to kind of deal with their whole historical thing that other countries have not dealt with, okay, and don't have. And I think that's a really important thing to do. So what I would suggest is that when you're doing this, really you know, have some cultural coaches and kind of involved with you, looking at this stuff, and look at the different makeup of your different departments, teams, or whatever that in the whole transformational thing. How many? What do the people come from? And not just the heads of the teams, but the people, everybody. How many where they come from originally, where they live now, how long they've lived there, and kind of getting a good idea. Yeah, you got to do analysis. Yeah, this is our GDP kind of stuff. Hey, come on. I mean, you get a GDPR stuff. I mean, you got to know. I mean, it's not GDPR. I mean, when you do this, you got to analyze who the people are, right? You got to do this because you need to see if this is going to be what the impact is going to be on them. And if you begin pushing and forcing a a horizontal leadership framework that is intended to help those that have a very vertical leadership kind of structure and a top-down one. If you if you push this and force this onto those that already live that come from horizontal structure and don't actually ask them how they would do it or how they would do it, this can create this can be really difficult because it's just people that already work in that mode, they don't need to have to. I mean, what happens too is when the people begin evangelizing these concepts, these transformations, and it's evangelization all the time, to the point where others they've if they already come from the culture, they're just saying, why do we have to hear this all the time? Okay. And especially if they come from a culture where they actually practice it. They can practice it, maybe not always at work because they've been in another thing, but they actually practice in other kind of things around things in life, right? Nonprofit associations, churches, music stuff, sports clubs, whatever. That actually might be happening elsewhere in their lives. Whereas for the Germans, it's the same structure will be fit everywhere. And actually, the Germans, what you'll run into is they may be trying to practice new work at work or unlearning hierarchies at work, but they're living hierarchies elsewhere in their life, right? So they're trying to deal with this, and trying to approach it in one place where they have some control. Okay. One place, one domain where they have some control of how they can affect the outcome and where things need to be doing. That's where they're going to apply it, but they can't apply it in like other places in the thing, like the school system for their children, for maybe in church or things that have a very traditional kind of traditional kind of structure, maybe in music schools and in where you got to have something, or like in cooking schools where it's always the same way, or I'm just trying to think of sports clubs where you got to be organized in sports clubs, right? If you don't get organized sports clubs, it's going to be a chaotic mess. Though there's some coaching and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just saying what happens when Germans are confronted with this and they're trying to change it in one place, but they're having to live still these very systematic, structured. I gotta train here. I don't think it's too loud. It's got a little hum right there on the side, but how do they deal with that? Whereas other cultures, like I said, that they're already kind of low hierarchy in general. They don't, okay, they might have some situations that might have a hierarchy, but maybe the majority of the situations they live in are not not hierarchy. It's mostly lower kind of midline hierarchy stuff. But if you begin pushing it on them all the time, they're just going to not. They're going to be confusing because they don't need it. They don't need to have this revolution. Okay, if we want to say that this is really a social historical revolution. If you want to look at it from an analytical point of view of culture, and this, it's really interesting. Just my background, in social, cultural, psychological, kind of all these different applications to a way of applying language and culture. It's this journey in this thing has, and kind of these different new work environments has shown me a lot, and shown me where just some people don't need it. Well, it's not they don't need it; they're already in it, or they already think that way, but they don't need to be purged of history that other national cultures have. Now, other cultures have their own problems, right? Everyone has their own problem and their own hang-ups. But this one, which affects work culture, has a hang-up and it affects a lot of people. And usually, if you work in small little teams and small teams in one office in one country, it's no big deal because you're all going to be come from the same place. Maybe a few people might be come from different places, but they've been there for a while, right? But it's usually in big organizations, multinationals. This is where you're going to find this thing, or government. Well, multinationals mainly. Multinationals. Governments, you're going to have pretty much people from the same country. Or if you have working with a European government, you might have people that are European come from different countries. But you're going to find this in multinational companies. That's very clear. And maybe NGOs too. Yeah, big stuff, big ones, big things. Um, and you're going to have people that won't share this, you don't have that share the same kind of historical view of things and all that, unless they all come from the same region, like Europe. Um, but I would say that this is kind of a real interesting thing too that you want to do is go ahead and just kind of focus on the I would say get some cultural training before you go into this thing. You really got to do some culture training before you do this, because you can get yourself into all kinds of, you got to know what you're going to get yourself into, um, and how others perceive it, and decide on it. Don't just because the Germans have gone through it. The Germans shouldn't just make it happen for everybody, right? Don't apply it to everybody. Don't make everybody apply it. Make sure that everybody is in agreement with it, that they really want to do it. And I'm not talking about leadership. I'm talking to everybody, because if there are even 25% of an entire division doesn't need it, then you're going to have 25% just saying, "Why are we wasting our time on this?" Right? Going through all these changes and change. Most people don't like change, right? So, and if you don't need the change, if someone perceives they don't need the change because it's all okay how they are, but others need the change because of historical things, then that gets kind of complicated. So I don't want to go on anymore. I just something to think about. This is brainstorming here. As I go through this and think about it. Think about this is kind of something that the Germans need to kind of think about when they do it. Okay, well, going out. Thanks.